Welcome to the Achieve Results Now podcast, the podcast that gives you immediate actions you can take to start seeing life-shifting results now. Hey everybody, welcome to the Achieve Results Now podcast. This is Mark Cardone.
And Theron Feidt.
So excited to be on number 4 of the Achieve Results Now Leadership Blueprint. We've talked about in the past couple episodes, we talked about integrity, we talked about vision, we talked about empathy, and today we are hitting one of my favorite things to talk about, which is decisiveness.
Yes. And this one can be tough, especially if you are a perfectionist. You know, this is, you like things done a certain way and you want to make sure it's right. And that's not a bad thing, especially depends on what you do for a living. You know, being precise is very important most of the time. For selling, for instance, is not as important in selling. There's other qualities that are more important. But if you're an engineer, probably one of the top things you need to be, a perfectionist with. But the decisiveness part is making the decision quickly.
Yeah.
And this is something that definitely takes. I mean, some people have it naturally, but most of us, we need to practice this for sure.
Mulling it over.
Yes.
Like I always think about, like, well, hey, have you thought about this at all? Well, I'm mulling it over.
Yeah.
And it's funny how decisiveness can span, and I love, the people who are listening to this will get this. It can span from major life decisions
Yeah.
to picking out, the select size paper towels that you want.
Right.
Which when you think about that, it's like it's exhausting how many decisions we make
Right.
during a day. I
Yep.
always think about how, they say Steve Jobs wore like the same shirt and pants every day, not the same
hmm
one, but the
hmm
same
Yeah.
outfit
Yeah. Right.
because
Yep.
it deleted one decision that he had to make. So it saved that muscle. And I really
Right.
do think, like you said, we have to work at it because that decision making is a muscle and it
Yeah.
can get stronger, but it can also, get tired.
Yeah. For
Um,
sure.
so I think becoming good at being decisive and building that muscle will help us not only, with those major life decisions, but also making sure you get the correct select size paper towels because
Yes.
you don't want the wrong ones.
Yeah. So I think if you have a big family, with many kids, you have to be very decisive or you're not going to get things done and the wheels are going to fall off. And if you run a business, I mean, there's more than that, but I think those are the two main categories that if you have either or both of those, you probably, just so you can survive, have to be decisive because decisions in business, if you want to be good at business, you have to make quick decisions sometimes. And you have to be willing to decide that that was a bad decision and change it too, So there's a lot to that. But the first rule we're going to put out is the 70% rule. So
Yeah.
that's step number one. Now, why do we pick 70%? I don't know. Is it exactly 70%? Not necessarily, right? But the whole idea is the information threshold. So when you're making a decision, not like where should we eat tonight? Hopefully you can be decisive with that, although some people aren't. But if it's a pretty important decision, having the majority of the information and making a decision is oftentimes better because you can lose opportunities, especially in business. You can lose opportunities by procrastinating, by waiting, by let me mull it over, like you said earlier,
Yeah.
and
Mhm.
and that can be very dangerous.
100%. And, 70% of the information is better than, 50% of the information, but 50, you really, like you said, 50% of the information is better than 20%.
Right.
Don't get so hung up on the number, but having that bias for action mindset,
hmm
is what I think is important because, a good plan, when we talk about decision making, I always think about this. If information is what's holding you back, and then you get more information, a lot of times with many people, that's where it ends.
Yeah.
It
Right.
becomes like I'm out of shape, I need to do something, so I'm going to research and I'm going to get
hmm
70, I'm going to get the information, and then I feel better. Like I don't
hmm
feel as out of shape because I
Right.
have information now. I
Right.
mean, how many times do people come into the dojo and they take that first class and then they kind of go, well, now I feel better. Like I don't need to do this
Yep.
forever because I'm better now. And it's like,
Right.
well, no, you're really not.
Yeah.
Like you just capped it. So having that bias for action
Right.
mindset right, is about, executed now is better than a perfect plan later. So taking
Yeah.
that action as part of your decision.
Right. And the last part of this is the decision reversible? Right. And so that's going to weigh in as well.
Yeah.
So if it's a decision that's a life-changing decision, you're going to buy a house. Now, not that you can't sell that house, but it's a pretty big decision. I mean, because you deal with it every day. You're going to start a business. You're going to rent a space, and you need to sign a 5-year lease. Okay, that's a pretty big decision. So you want to make sure that not again, it's not that it's irreversible, but 5 years, and you owe this amount of money, whether you make money or not, to the landlord. You got to think about that, right? However, lots of times if it is reversible easily, we still wait long to get the information, right?
Yeah.
So those are the quickly reversible decisions are the ones you should make quick. And
Yeah.
maybe you don't even have the 70%, you have 50%. So that way you can uh who talked about failing quickly? There was a book, remember that years
I
ago?
do. I don't remember
I
who
don't
it
know if
was.
that was the right title, but that was that whole idea. Fail as quick as you can.
Mhm.
That way you're leading towards success. And that's kind of the same idea. Making quick decisions that can be reversible to see what works. It's a trial and error type of thing.
I like to think about which actions are not, like, I think I could amputate a toe and put it back on. So I mean, most
Okay.
decisions, but like you said, there's varying
Yeah.
degrees of difficulty,
Right. Right.
to reversing decisions. So I think that's a great thing to think about. Not
Yes,
amputating
for
a
sure.
toe, but the decision thing.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying because
You're
no
welcome.
one was sure
I want to
what
make
you
sure.
meant.
Getting into our second action item, and we talk about frameworks a lot on the podcast, but this
Yeah.
is about building a personal decision framework, right? Because decisiveness isn't really about being impulsive, right? It's about having that repeatable process to your decision making, so that
Hmm.
when a decision presents itself, you are, almost like a reflex. You're prepared to take the actions to make that decision.
Yep. And the other part of this is make a deadline.
Yeah,
So put a deadline in. This is when I'm going to make the decision by, and make it firm, write it down, put it in your phone, whatever the case is, because this is where people falter as well. They say, okay, I have my information, and I just got to decide to do it, and then I'll get to it tomorrow, and then tomorrow I'll get to it tomorrow. So there's always a tomorrow. They always use that tomorrow, and obviously tomorrow's never going to come. So we need to make sure, just like a goal, this is when I'm going to do it. This is when I'm going to get it. And that way it puts pressure on you. Um, we can either have other people apply pressure to us, which is discipline, or we can apply pressure to ourselves, which is self-discipline. And self-discipline is much harder to gain and get, but this is what we have to do. And like we talked about, it's a muscle, and so if we're putting those deadlines on ourselves, we're going to be much more successful in many areas of life.
yeah, and I love this action item because it's so simple. Because when we talk about a framework, it's not about the actual things within the framework, because they may vary by the size and all the things that we talked about in the first part here, right? So
Right.
like, your non-negotiables for one decision will be very different than your
Right.
non-negotiables for another decision. Your deadline, when you say, hey, I'm going to make a decision in the next 24 hours or in the next 5 minutes or in the next whatever,
Hmm.
it's going to be different, based on kind of the weight of the decision, but knowing that, defining your non-negotiables, setting your decision deadline, like the steps are what's important in the framework. So getting into step three of this, so we've got non-negotiables, your decision deadline, and then what we call the pre-mortem technique, right? I
Yep.
like that word, like
I
this
know.
is really,
Yeah.
yeah, this is about, what if, like, what if it fails? Spend five
Right.
minutes kind of thinking about it, like, well, what if this happens? Why did it fail? And address those risks, ahead of
Hmm.
time. And you and I have talked about this before, like, what's, like, really think, what's the worst that can happen?
Right.
Like, if this craters, like, what's the consequence, and how can I mitigate that?
Well, isn't what your thing is, death or jail?
Death or jail? If I'm
Yeah.
not going to die and I'm not going to go to jail, let's go.
That's pretty wide open.
That's pretty very white. And I've made a lot of bad decisions, but I make them quick and I reverse them when I need to. And I still have all 10 toes. All 10 toes are still
That's
there.
nice. All right. Action item number three is own the outcome. Now, this one can be difficult for some people, and we all
Yeah.
know people like this. Uh, Oftentimes, you see middle managers like this a lot, where they point fingers at people, and oh, it wasn't my fault. Or they don't make a decision, they make others make a decision, or they make lower levels make a decision, or they just blame other people, and that, I mean, it's weak character for sure, and it's certainly a flaw, but it also doesn't help you in the long run, because you're not learning how to make decisions and how to live by them. So the commander's intent is when you make a call and own it, know it, and if we're moving in the wrong direction, say it. Hey, listen, I made a mistake. Let's move on. So don't make a big deal about it. You don't need to make a huge apology. And if there's an apology because it damaged somebody, obviously, but oftentimes it's just like, hey, sorry, I thought it was working, it didn't, and then you just move on. And what that does is that helps your team as well, though. It helps your team. If you can admit when you're wrong, your team, that's going to build trust in your team.
Yeah.
It's going to be like, okay, because you don't have to be perfect in every aspect if you're the leader. I mean, it's nice to try to have a lot of great areas, but you're going to make mistakes. And admitting them quickly, acknowledging them, that just builds trust with your team.
Yeah. I love that because it's so easy when the decision works to take credit.
Yeah.
And like when the decision, which it's so funny because when I think about leaders, this is like a little segue. Like I think about people who are ineffective leaders, and what do? Is they take credit when the decision works, but when the decision doesn't work, they finger point, right? And they
Yeah.
say, well, it's
Right.
because my desk was uncomfortable, it's because I didn't have this part of the thing or whatever. Effective leaders are the exact opposite.
Right.
They take responsibility when the decision doesn't work, but when the decision does work, we're not up here saying like, "Look, it was all me. It was the team, right? It
Yeah.
was the yes, like maybe we take credit for the idea, but
Right.
we're really spreading credit." And I think
Yeah.
that's a cool part of this. And getting into the next part, killing the analysis paralysis culture.
Hmm.
Analysis paralysis is really that, for the people who aren't familiar, it's that thing when you say, "Hey, we're going to make a decision, but I just want more information before I do it."
Right.
And I've worked for people in my life who have dragged analysis paralysis to the point where it drove me insane.
Right.
Like, well, we can't make a decision. Well, what about this? What about this? What about this?
Right.
And this goes almost against that 70% principle that we talked about in the beginning, right? If you have enough information, the best thing you can teach your team to do is make the best decision you can with the information you have.
Right.
And that kills that analysis paralysis culture. It's just with the information you have and your insights and everything, just do the best you can. And
Yep.
then as a leader, we stand behind that.
Right. And the last part of this step is the fail forward review. So if the decision was a bad decision, you failed, do a quick review, 5-10 minutes. It doesn't have to be long. The after action report. How did it go? Why do you think it went wrong? What can we do better? And then sometimes it's just a small little pivot that you need to do. So maybe the whole action or decision wasn't bad. Maybe only parts of it was. Maybe it was the
Yeah.
timing of it. Maybe it was the execution of it. Maybe there wasn't enough funds behind it. I mean, there's a lot of it, and that after action review will help adjust that. So oftentimes it's not like the decision was 100% wrong.
Yeah.
It was only 50% wrong, or maybe it was only 20% wrong. And by making a little pivot and a little adjustment, now you can hit the target much better. Because I mean, really, and being in business as long as you have, rarely is a decision 100% effective.
Right.
Especially if you do marketing. That means if somebody says, I have this marketing and it always works and I'm going to get this many leads, they're lying to you.
Yeah.
It's just, it's not.
Either,
Take half of that, and that's maybe what will happen, as far as, the results. So that failing forward, but it's all about reviewing how it went, and then taking action from there.
I love that. Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. All right. So let's get back here. So we're talking about the Achieve Results Now Leadership Blueprint, talking about decisiveness,
Hmm.
right? And being our catalyst. So let's get through our 3 action steps to help people be more decisive so they can make those decisions quicker and exhaust that decision muscle less.
Yes.
So action item number one, adopt the 70% rule, right? Don't wait until you have 100% of the information.
Right.
Let's set, 70% or whatever that percentage is, let that be enough to make a decision, and then make sure that decision turns into a bias for action, right?
Right.
Um, and then while you're doing that, identify those reversible decisions, distinguish between the one-way roads and the roads that you can come back from.
Right. Step two is build a personal decision framework. So this includes what are your non-negotiables, so define those. So 3 to 5 core values that you're not that are a no, for you. The second part of that is set a deadline, just like you would any goal. Is make sure you have a deadline that this is when I'm going to make the decision by and stick to it. And the last one, if it was a bad decision, or if it didn't work out 100%, do a pre-mortem technique. And I like that because everybody knows the post-mortem, but the pre-mortem. So this is well, actually, this is if it didn't work out, what pretend it doesn't work out. What am I going to do with it? So even before you make the decision, you're thinking about what is the worst case scenario. And like with you, am I going to go to jail or could I die? If it's not none of those two things, pull the trigger.
Then we're good to go. 100%. And then step three is about owning the outcome. I mean? And as I talk about owning the outcome, I always say, like, man, imagine, I was going to say most decisions aren't going to work out the way you plan,
Yeah.
right? Especially if you're a business owner, if you have a
Yeah.
family, most of your decisions are not going to go swimmingly as easily and as wonderfully as you think. And then I'm starting to think of a world where they do. And I'm going, man, that'd be boring. Right.
Hmm.
But owning that outcome, so taking that commander's intent, really you're driving the ship. So you're explaining
Hmm.
the logic, but you're owning that risk, right? That's all on you. Kill that analysis paralysis, make the best decisions you can with the
Hmm.
information you have, and then just make sure that if it doesn't work out, you're failing forward. We're reviewing, we're thinking about what could we do better? How can we make it work next time? All those things, because really like the failed decisions are what turn into the great decisions and the great paths forward.
Yeah, that's good. The last thing I do want to read that we wrote,
Yeah.
this is kind of encompassing everything. The bottom line to this is indecision is a decision, right? And a decision to stay it's a decision to stand still. And
Right.
leaders don't always make the right choice, but when they make a choice, they make it right through the execution. So I just like that kind of sums it up of all the things.
100%. I really think one of the greatest skills you can develop is the ability to adapt through failure,
Right.
and through challenge. Because I think, regardless of the decisions you make, you're going to make mistakes, and this is the best way through it. So,
Right.
be decisive, move forward, share this podcast with somebody that would like it, and make sure you tune in to the next episode in our leadership blueprint. We will see you on the next one.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for listening. Hop over to our website at www.achieveresultsnow.com to get your free copy of our book, Ignite Results, 4 specific daily actions to help you achieve results now. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Achieve Results Now. Thanks for listening, commenting, and subscribing. Now get out there and achieve results now.